with Reverend Raphael to look at the history of the Black church in the Flint community and the things that it did beyond just the religious practices in the community. And he's got quite a panel here, and I'm going to ask him to introduce his panel, and so I'll get out of the way. The last thing I just want to say is, Russians are done at that end. We promised the library we'd be out by 8, so we usually try to wrap things up about 7:30. That gives us time to do a little extra chatting before we get out by 8. But thank you very much for coming. We appreciate having you here.
Thank you very much. God bless you. It's just good to see all of you here, because this is the day that the Lord has made. And I don't know about you, but I've been rejoicing in it all day long. I tell you, this is quite an experience to be here, and especially part of this neighborhood group we're dealing with various ethnic groups, and also dealing with that subject, racism. Amen. And we have been striving to do some great things here and to inform people. And tonight, my responsibility is to share with you about the Black church. Black church, and you're going to have to make it plural because the Black churches. And when I first took on this subject, I thought they were just speaking about my denomination of the Black church. But then after I began to do my research, I found that there were other denominations, and we're going to do a great job tonight. And I didn't want to miss this moment by myself, because I have three distinguished gentlemen to my left, and we're going to introduce them, and we'll let them just say a word. Well, let me introduce them, then we're going to let them talk later. To my left is the Reverend Dr. Turner Hartfield. Reverend Dr. Turner Hartfield. To his left is the Woody Etherly Jr. And to the extreme left, Cornelius Williams. Robert Cornelius Williams. These gentlemen, we will be discussing the establishment of and a flourishing of the Black church, the theology of the church, and Dr. Hartfield will be handling that part. And then next to him will be making contributions of the Black church dealing with the political world. And Reverend Etherly will be dealing with that part. And then the last part will be dealing with the impact of the church through the United Auto Workers. How did the church embrace with the United Auto Workers and to help build this community that we're so proud of? And then we're going to wrap it all up and summarize the accomplishments of the Black churches and where do we go from here. Amen? First of all, the Black church. Let me respect some of our resources now. Because I asked one lady over there, are you Rhonda Sanders? Anybody read this book called The Pillars? The Bronze Pillars. This is a book that was written by Rhonda Sanders. And she went into detail of the Black community and churches. And I borrowed a few quotes and ideas from her book. That's one we will be getting information from. We also, our research will be coming from the Christian Educational, the Informer, the significance of worship in the Negro Baptist Church. And this has come from our Sunday School Publishing Board in Nashville, Tennessee. And then the other book that we borrowed information from is from our National Baptist Convention of the USA, Lifted as We Climb. And this deals with all of the history of the Black churches all the way from Baptist, Church of God in Christ, Charles Mason. We're going to talk about how he beat his tambourine and we excommunicated him out of the Baptist arena and he left us. So we hope to have some exciting information for you. And if we have time, we'll have a little question question and answer period. But we're going to get right into it because we just want to make sure we start this off right, Dr. Hartfield. You know, the Baptist Church just didn't start yesterday. The Baptist denomination, black churches, just didn't start yesterday. The black church came together because of slavery as black people, descendants of Africa. They needed some place to assemble and to give praises to God. They really didn't know about this Christianity, or should I say, the Holy Bible that had been written, that they studied out of, that our counterparts, the Western European culture, had implemented to us. We as black slaves, we're not familiar with that relationship of worshiping God and giving praises to God. A lot of you remember Roots. When Kunta Kinte was born, his dad took him to the highest point in the valley and lifted him up to a higher power. He really didn't know that he was lifting him up to Jehovah, God, Allah. He did not understand that because he was from Africa. But as the black churches began to populate and the people began to populate in slavery, we began to take on the Christianity by what the European culture, or what we call the white people, the master, had set up. And there in Savannah, Georgia, early in the days, early in Savannah, black people used to stand in wagons and watch the white congregation demonstrate their worship. And then they would go back behind the barn and then worship their God. But the theology of black churches, and Dr. Hartfield, I'd like for you to kind of tell us about a little about the theology of the black church.
Reverend Hartfield, thank you for this opportunity to tell you about the theology of the black church. Well, first thing I think we should know is that I appreciate you talking about the beginning of the worship and how it started. But we got to realize that Absalom Jones and Richard Allen brought about the knowledge to the black slaves. It was known that they were not people who could read or knew the word and that, but the slave owners let Absalom Jones and Richard Allen have a Bible. And of course, they taught the slaves, and the slaves began to understand the language and what people were talking about. And the slave owners first had to order the slave, the one that had the most slaves had the greatest power. And they were assembled in a building, and then when they found out that the slaves could know how to talk and how to understand, they moved them into the roof, into the balcony, where they couldn't see, couldn't hear, so they were just there. And of course, the black church felt that the black leaders of the slaves felt that this was not right, so they talked to a farmer and got a building, and they began their worship. Now this was during the days of slavery. But let's talk about Flint just a little bit. Flint was a church, or was a place that people worshiped for a long time, and I heard a lot about it. I first came to Flint in 1925, and in 1925, I was a young lad. I didn't know much about church, but as I grew up, graduated, went to college, and came back to Flint, I found out that one of the oldest churches in Flint was Quinn Chapel, A&E. And Quinn Chapel was in a little church off of Saginaw, I forget the name.
7th Street.
7th Street, 7th from Saginaw. But we know that they're person, they're on the south side. Of course, on the south side, we also had early church, the Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. And then on the north side, we had Shiloh Baptist Church. And those of you who know about Shiloh, Reverend James was a very famous preacher, and he was very well known. In fact, my mother became a member of the mother's board of that church. We had New Zion Baptist Church. We had one of the other early churches was Canaan Missionary Baptist Church. And Metropolitan.
Before you get too far into that, Doc, I know you started off, but I like to stick with that theology. Why were the black people, what was our relationship with God? Why were we worshiping as Christians, as slaves? What was our goal at that time?
Our goal at that time was unity, to come together and to worship God. And some people call him Jehovah, but I want you to know that God has more than 75 various names. And but they came together and they wanted to do something to try to let the slaves know that God was the head of religion, and that nothing could be done without the aid of God. And they broke down religion, and they found, well, let's don't go too far into the Old Testament or New Testament, would be too long. But I want to say to you that it was because of the singing that kind of brought us together. Worshiping or singing was one of the key elements in letting the slaves know what to do. When they slipped away and got away, they were singing songs and they would assemble at places of that. But it was through the worship and through the theology that they began to develop the knowledge and the realization that slavery was not what it should be. They were human beings.
Amen. And what we thought of in the establishment and theology, summing that part up, is that we as black slaves, we had to find some type of release of the pressure of the mindset of society at that time. Slavery was something else under the master. We were dehumanized, we were criticized, we were left out of the situations in that particular area, especially in the South. But in Flint, Michigan, really, as Dr. said, the first black church was Quinn Chapel in 1875. 1875 in Flint, Michigan. The black population really began to settle on the south end of Flint, near Trade Lake, and on the west side of South Saginaw Street in 1875. It was the only church in Flint that was black. And people that were on the north side, they had to catch a streetcar. Some of you don't realize, but streetcars ran up and down Saginaw Street and Industrial Avenue. They had to catch a streetcar if they lived across the track area on the extreme north side, because there were no churches in 1875. No black church other than Quinn Chapel. Here's another thing about Quinn Chapel. Quinn Chapel Macedonians, those members that were black were attending Court Street Methodist Church. And then there started a campaign in Philadelphia by a leader named Richard Allen and Exelon Jones. Say, look, we're sick and tired of being upstairs in the balcony while you all are down in the sanctuary praising God. So Richard Allen, according to Rhonda, she said that Richard Allen started a campaign, and all blacks throughout the nation, out of Philadelphia and everywhere, began to assemble in AME churches. Now there's a little question about were they CMEs first or were they AMEs? One writer said there were CMEs. Usually that C at that time, due to the mindset, they were colored Methodist Episcopalians.
Right.
And then after that, they advanced from colored CMEs to AMEs, which means they were African Methodist Episcopalian. Can I get amen?
Amen.
And then after that, we got a little higher. Those that were Macedonian, they went A-M-E-Z.
Zion. That's right.
We always multiply by division, Brother Frank. I never could figure it out as I read the material of Sister Rhonda. And I want to give quotes to her because she did a good job. If you don't have this book, you need, this is really a good book to read and study our history. And as time began to change in the late 1800s and going into the 1900s, the first black Baptist church was Mount Olive. And it was on the south side.
Yeah.
There's something about Flint as we begin to grow that the early settlers settled on the south side of Flint. Now it has been told and said in barbershops that if you want to find a black community, find the nearest railroad tracks or find a river or a lake, and you will find us there. So as the settlers began to grow over on the south side, they were down by Trade Lake and south of the viaduct on South Saginaw Street on the west side of Saginaw Street. Now historically, blacks were not on the west side of Saginaw Street on the north end of town. But this is in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, around 1910. Mount Olive was organized, and then Quinn Chapel was the Methodist church, and then those that were not Methodists and believed in Jesus Christ and became Christian and Baptist, they became members of Mount Olive Baptist Church at that particular time. One more point about Quinn Chapel before we move on. Quinn Chapel started in a little house on the south side. And then around 1915, as the historians say, a wind came back and huffed and puffed and blew the little house down. And they purchased some property on the corner of 7th Street and Saginaw. They moved into that building, Quinn Chapel. And a few years later, around in the 50s, the City Hall used to be down where the Fort McCree District Court is, my good pastor friend, near down by your church there, St. Paul Episcopal Church. That's where the City Hall was, and the jailhouse was right back there in Buckingham Alley. And there's a bowling alley upstairs of Walgreens. Walgreens building is still sitting on Saginaw right now. But Quinn Chapel had the audacity and the courage to move from that corner, 7th Street and Saginaw, and they rebuilt the City Hall. Quinn Chapel sold their property to the city, and they built the City Hall on 7th Street and Saginaw and moved to Lippincott where they are now. So those were the early churches in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then around 1925 and 1930, there was a church on the north end named Galilee. Galilee Baptist Church, which is on the corner of Black and Industrial on the north end. Now the population began to grow on the north sleep in, one to eat in, and one to play in. And that's where the early settlers around 1925 and 28, about time you were a little boy back then, and they put all that together, and then the population began to grow on the north end of Flint, but it was on the east side of the railroad track, St. John Street area. And the St. John Street area was occupied by the Polish community in the early days. And one thing about us as black people, and the black churches begin to grow, they begin to move west. Everybody begin to go west or south. But this is the early establishment of the churches and the theology of the church and the relevancy of the black church. And that is to worship and to give homage and praises to our Father, Jesus, or God, and the Son of Jesus, Son of God, Jesus.